Hey YouTube, this is Archangel for Truth, and this is a re-recording for my previous recording pertaining to constitutional misinterpretations by the Supreme Court. Now, before I go into it, I want to clarify that I am not a licensed attorney and that anything I'm sharing here would only be according to my personal views and opinions, and should be considered as such by those who should hear this audio recording. With that said, ultimately, the reason why I say that the Supreme Court in many of its decisions are wrong. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the far majority of Supreme Court decisions that are made are wrongly decided cases or wrongly decided decisions or opinions that they have made. Now, I'm going to give you an example of a case. It's referred to as Wickard versus Philbin. And basically what this case is about is there was this man named Wickard who basically wanted to grow wheat for his own use, for his own consumption, and for that of his animals, and ultimately to regrow wheat the following year. But the state had, or not the state, but the Congress rather, they came up with an act that ultimately regulated how much wheat or any particular type of vegetable could be grown. And ultimately what they did is they ended up fining Mr. Wickard for growing too much wheat. Now, the reason or justification that they used was the Commerce Clause. Ultimately, what the Commerce Clause does is it regulates commerce between the states, but also between the entire government and even international commerce. So this case, though, is so wrongly decided that basically what it's establishing is that the government can tell you not just how much you can grow of a certain type of plant, but also what to plant. And so that is clearly against what the Constitution established and not in agreement with the original understanding of the Commerce Clause itself. So, but the problem is, the reason why I bring this up is because the Commerce Clause is kind of used like a catch-all for the government to expand its authority and to infringe upon the inalienable, unenumerated natural rights of individuals. And the problem we have there is because all the government has to do is say, well, if this comes under the Commerce Clause, we can do this. An example of that was a case that was also fought in the Supreme Court. It was, oh my goodness. It's a very famous case. It's Raich versus, I can't think of the other name of it. But basically it was this woman that was growing medicinal pot for her own health issues. And basically the government said, well, you can't do this because it will impact commerce. And ultimately, so the Supreme Court struck it down. And the attorney that actually fought that case is a very, very good attorney. His name is Randy Barnett. And I would highly recommend, if you have never heard of Randy Barnett, that you do a little research about him. I think you will find him a quite compelling attorney as it pertains to the importance of the Declaration of Independence and how that is an original document to the founding of this nation, and ultimately how the courts are misconstruing a lot of things. And he goes into detail. If you ever watch any of his videos or read any of his books, I highly recommend that you do so. But that wasn't the only case that pertained to this wrongly decided case. Ultimately, it was used also in the Obamacare case, the mandate, the individual mandate for health care. And the reason why that is such a bad situation, because now what the government is saying, that it has the authority to require you to purchase something from private companies. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why I can tell you why I believe that that case is wrongly decided. I would say in part that it is a violation of the Takings Clause, but it also violates your individual rights to choose what you are going to do and how you're going to spend your money. And so ultimately, this is, again, it was a case that was decided, and the case law that was used for it was, again, Wickard versus Philbin. So please do some research on this case. I tell you, it is one of the greatest threats to your freedom out there, and by far one of the worst cases the Supreme Court has ever decided, and wrongly decided at that. So the other thing that I point out in my previous recording is that the reason why the far majority of court cases, Supreme Court cases, are wrongly decided is because you have a scenario here where you have 9 justices, okay? And in many of those cases, you have a 5-4 decision, okay? So 4 will be a dissenting, basically the lesser amount of justices who disagree. And ultimately it's decided based upon the majority. Well, there's a problem right there at the outset. If you have 4 Supreme Justices that would say that this decision that is being decided is not correctly decided, then doesn't it make sense that those who are not within the legal field, or those without legal training or so forth, might also be confused as regards to its legal implications? Okay, but nevertheless, you will be held accountable for those ultimate decisions that the Supreme Court is making. Now, the other problem with the Supreme Court and how it is making its opinions is that it doesn't factor in its decisions the rights that we have that are referred to within the Ninth Amendment. Now, the Ninth Amendment is pertaining to unenumerated rights. Well, for those of you who do not know what unenumerated rights are, it's a very simply, these are rights not listed by the Constitution. So the very fact that the founders decided within the Bill of Rights to place the Ninth Amendment there to ensure that these unenumerated rights would be protected, these are the things that the courts are not recognizing. See, what they've done is they've decided that they're only going to recognize what they're calling fundamental rights. And those fundamental rights are basically the enumerated rights within the Constitution. But the problem we have is that the Ninth Amendment says that the unenumerated rights shall not be denied or disparaged, and on the basis of the numeration of the Constitution. So here we have the exact opposite of what the Ninth Amendment says is what is actually the Supreme Court is doing. So I'll give you an example of a Ninth Amendment case or Ninth Amendment situation, the right to privacy. Now, it doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution that you have the right to privacy, but nevertheless, the courts, based upon the different reasonings that they decided, realized that there is a Ninth Amendment right to privacy, an unenumerated right. So the problem here is that also, the Constitution itself, if you look at what the Constitution is, it is only certain rights that the founders decide to enumerate. But now ask yourself, what were those rights before the founders decided to list them as part of a Constitution? Those rights, prior to being listed on the Constitution, were also unenumerated, inalienable, natural rights. So just because they chose to enumerate some of the rights that we have did not divest the other rights that we have. And the Ninth Amendment clearly says that those other rights are retained by the people. Now, that in itself is very important that it says retained by the people, because oftentimes government would like to regulate or deny certain rights that the people have. But the problem is if they're going to adhere to the Ninth correctly, doesn't say that these rights are retained by the government, doesn't say that these rights are retained by the states, it doesn't even say that these rights are retained by the judiciary. It says that these rights are retained by the people. And so it's very important in understanding that these rights are our inalienable, unenumerated natural rights, and we have them. And the government has no right to take these rights away. Doesn't matter whether the Supreme Court accepts them or not. We have the right to them, and the Bill of Rights clearly says so. And even the Declaration of Independence and the Founding Fathers clearly said so. And so that is why oftentimes the courts reject the Declaration of Independence and just want to only go to the Constitution, because it requires the court to accept that we the people, have the ability to have rights beyond what is limited to the Constitution, and they don't want to accept that. Their go-to is a fear that all sorts of anarchy will happen because you have all these rights, and we can't regulate all these rights, and we can't taxate all these rights, and that's really what it's all about. The government is now, it's no longer based upon protecting rights. It's now about being able to regulate and infringe upon the rights that we have. The original intent, according to the founders, was for the purpose of protecting our rights. That is not the kind of government that we have nowadays. And that's the sad reality. But, for those of you who hear this and share this, ultimately we have to stand up for the truth, and we need to share the truth. We need to wake up the younger generation, because if none of us ultimately stand up and tell them, how are they going to know? The government isn't going to tell them. Every year, we see it year after year, just another infringement of our rights. And every single decision made by the Supreme Court is another infringement on your unenumerated rights. Don't underestimate that fact, because their decision they have made, and they haven't even made as part of their analysis, in their opinion, how that would impact the unenumerated rights of we the people. And so that is why I say that the Supreme Court and its many decisions are very much so in error, and ultimately it's up to us. It's up to us to stand for our rights. It's up to us to stand for our freedoms. And if we're not willing to do that, you better believe that the government is willing to infringe upon that. And we've observed this more and more. So with that being said, I'm going to leave it here. And I thank all of you who do support me. I appreciate every thumbs up and every view. I had to re-record this because the previous recording, I was having some issues with the microphone. So I hope that this one is a lot clearer and more understandable. And if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to leave them, as long as they're respectful. I always leave comments up, even if there are those from individuals who disagree. So with that, I say, God bless you all, and take care.